Welcome to this short video where we'll be discussing the linkage between research designs, data collection methods and philosophy within business research. Now, research philosophy is a contested subject and research designs is another contested subject. So there's not too much out there in the literature giving explicit linkages between these concepts. Within this video, I will give my experience and my understanding of how linkages can be made between these concepts. Now, the first thing to note is there's a lot of contested definitions, even of the terms within this area. So people call the same thing research designs, research strategies, research processes, or even research methodologies. But when I'm talking about research designs in this video, I'm essentially talking about a process through which you will achieve your research aims and answer your research questions. So how will you conduct your research and what will it involve to go and get that data which will answer your research questions? Now, of course, some of these research designs dictate more, and some give you more leeway to actually select different methods within that design. This means some of these research designs almost act like a wrapper, which you then select what methods you use within inside this wrapper. And research designs are not mutually exclusive. So for example, if you have a questionnaire research design, you could potentially use a questionnaire in other research designs too, such as action research or case study research. But we'll come on to this in the next slide. But the key thing is the linkage between these research designs, data collections and methods is all contested. I'm just going to be giving you my view and interpretation from my experience. But of course, you need to do a lot more reading to justify the links which you're going to put forward in your own research. So there is much debate about research designs and even a lack of consensus about which proposed designs are really research designs. I have taken 8 research designs which I commonly see used within business research, and I have adopted myself and supported doctoral researchers to utilise in their own research. And I will use my limited drawing skills to highlight the types of data proposed or commonly utilised within each research design. The first one being a questionnaire research design. And this is quite simple. This is a research design based on questionnaires, which is focused on quantitative data collected through a structured process using a questionnaire. So therefore, what we find is we're going to be using quantitative data. So the next type of a research design is action research. And this is all about reviewing and evaluating the effectiveness of an intervention. And we normally do this through several stages or cycles of iteration of an intervention. Now, ultimately, this gives us flexibility to choose the type of data which is most effective within this research design, based on what the intervention is seeking to achieve. So for example, if we're looking to put in an intervention which is going to change the number of errors in a production line and reduce that number, it would be perfectly reasonable and easy to justify using a quantitative approach. However, if our intervention is around a more softer area, such as identity and how people build up an organisational identity when joining a company or build up a community, we might want to have more qualitative data. Or we could have a mix of part quantitative and part qualitative. Really, it all depends on what we're trying to achieve with our intervention. Now, the next type of research design we're going to be talking about is case study. And within a case study, we're selecting a unit of analysis to be studied from multiple angles and perspectives. But this case study research design gives us the flexibility to pick and choose what methods we use within this wrapper. Now, one of the key things we find with case study designs, and one of the key requirements, is that context is really important. So this means we often use qualitative data, and it can be multiple types of qualitative data, because one of the expectations and requirements of a case study is commonly multiple angles. And to do this, we need multiple types of data, multiple perspectives. So we might use interviews and focus groups, for example, or we might additionally want to use our methods to interview different people from different angles. However, within a case study, it doesn't dictate that we must use only qualitative data to get these multiple angles and perspectives. So we could use quantitative data too. So qualitative data backed up by quants, or we could do it the other way around. It's up to us how we integrate the qualitative and quantitative data. Now, from my understanding, case study research design does not dictate that theoretically we couldn't do a case study with more than one type of quantitative data, so multiple quantitative methods. Although from my experience, it would seem quite hard to justify this, because one of the key things with case studies is all about the context, and numbers can lose some of this context potentially when we can't relate that context back so easily. But there's nothing, I believe, saying that you cannot do a case study using multiple quantitative sources. However, I think it's less common. Now, the next type of research design we're going to discuss is Q methodology. And here we're much more fixed. So Q methodology is all about understanding different viewpoints and seeing how they relate and emerge and ultimately what they are. But Q methodology is fixed in terms of we start off with numbers to try and quantify these viewpoints and understand what they are, and then we research them with more qualitative data to understand what these viewpoints are. So this is quite a nice research design in terms of it being fixed, and we don't need to decide the methods. The quantification within the research design is already explained how we do it through doing a sorting process and then follow-up interviews. We're now going to talk about narrative research quickly. And narrative research is focused on participants' narratives and accounts, often through storytelling and in-depth interviews. So as it sounds, this is very qualitative to understand people's narratives. Now, in this video, I'm not going to go through the different types of qualitative data in depth, but this is normally beyond just a quick interview, but it's really understanding people's own accounts, narratives and stories. So there's often some kind of element of unearthing stories from participants. So this might involve potentially drawing timelines, for example. In terms of ethnography, we're also interested in qualitative data, but this comes through observation and observing participants in their own context and environment, in their natural setting. Now, I've also seen people argue to supplement this observation, it is also possible to add some qualitative research from interviews, focus groups, etc. to really bolster your understanding. Interpretive phenomenological analysis is another research design where it's commonly argued goes through the whole process from the data collection through to the analysis, similar to Q methodology. Now here we're interested very much in lived experience. So again, qualitative data, but the way in which this can be collected is a bit more open. So it might not necessarily be interviews, it could be, but it could also be focus groups, potentially logs and journeys. But what's really important here isn't just the qualitative data, but actually the depth with a longitudinal experience and a lived perspective. And then a final one where some textbooks don't really recognise as a research design, but interviewing. And commonly people might struggle with a research design because they might look to either narrative research, but they're not actually getting that kind of depth within individuals' narratives and stories, or they might go for a case study because they are looking at a case. But it doesn't necessarily meet the tenets of being a case study, multiple perspectives, multiple accounts, etc. So personally, I think it's also okay to recognise interviews as a research design, whereby we might not be looking for the same depth you would find in a case study or narrative research, but rather look for broader perspectives and themes through interviews. So here we might not be focused on as much depth, but rather trying to understand the breadth within a sample. When it comes to linking these 8 research designs which I've mentioned, we can do this through the methods and ultimately what each philosophy thinks represents good knowledge within the assumptions of the philosophy. So if we draw out a line, a continuum of the research philosophies, and we plot them along this continuum, we can start off with positivism being the most scientific and structured, and then realism, which seeks and values objectivity but also recognises some subjectivities required. And then we have pragmatism, which isn't so focused on the methods but the outcome, and it wants to ensure that the methods are able to get the data required to achieve the goals of the research. And then we have constructivism, where we're trying to construct an understanding of what is going on in the world. Interpretivism, interpreting views and opinions, and phenomenology, where we're trying to understand lived experience. Feel free to check out some other videos or do more reading to understand these philosophies in more depth. But linking the research designs we've just discussed with these philosophies, well, starting out with questionnaires, these fit quite firmly, I'd say, under positivism, because their whole goal is about generalising, it's about structure, it's about objectivity, and this is what quantitative questionnaires allow us to achieve. Action research, well, this could go over quite a broad range of philosophies, potentially, depending on what that intervention is. That intervention could be something where you want to objectively see what impact an intervention has had. So for example, errors on a production line. Or it could be much more in a social science domain and interpreting the views and understanding of how people feel part of a new community. So I think action research can go quite broadly across different philosophies depending on the method you're using and ultimately what you're trying to achieve with your intervention. Case study. I personally would plot somewhere between realism and interpretivism. So you could do a case study with mixed methods at the end of realism, or you could be throwing in all these mixed methods together in pragmatism. Or you could be using multiple perspectives from a qualitative data collection path to try and construct an understanding of what's going on or interpret views. As I mentioned on the last slide, I think you could potentially argue having a positivist case study, but I think it would be a little bit more tricky to get in the requirement of context. Similarly, I think you could potentially argue you had a phenomenological case study, but again, the challenges might exist around bringing together multiple accounts of lived experience to come up with an understanding of one unit of analysis, because phenomenology sees different accounts of lived experiences as being unique. Q methodology I would fairly firmly put in realism. You have a sequential mixed methods, valuing objectivity first and seeking to objectively understand different viewpoints through the quantitative analysis of sorts. But I think you could also argue it would fit within a pragmatism philosophy too. Narrative research I would see being at the more social science end of the philosophical spectrum, through either interpreting individuals' views from stories or potentially using it to chart and understand lived experience longitudinally. Ethnography, I think, can easily be classified to fit under phenomenology, because it's all about viewing individuals in their own environment and observing their lived reality. However, I have seen previously ethnography successfully argued to fit under constructivism and interpretivism, as ethnography can be used to observe and understand what's going on, to construct an understanding of reality and interaction, or to observe people's interpretation and reviews and response to situations. Interpretivist phenomenological analysis, IPA, I think fits fairly firmly under phenomenology because it has this lived experience, this longitudinal element and angle to it. And finally, my kind of catch-all research design, where if you're using interviews, but you're looking more for breadth, an interview research design, I think fits very neatly under constructivism and interpretivism, because you can use this breadth to try and conduct some thematic analysis and understand these reoccurring themes through a constructivist or an interpretivist viewpoint. So, some conclusions. There should be alignment between the research philosophy, design, and the methods adopted. However, ultimately, this needs to be justified within the literature and text. I've just given you in this video my own interpretations from being involved in research and having the pleasure to conduct research across all these research designs and having read some textbooks along the way. Now, the research philosophy, design, and the methods selected should be chosen based on the ability to achieve the research aim. And it's really important we never lose sight of this. We shouldn't select methods just because it fits a certain philosophy or design, but actually this alignment should be driven centrally by the ability to achieve the research aim and answer the research questions. And some research designs require the researcher to select the data collection methods and analyst procedures. However, others are more structured, such as Q methodology. It tells us the process we go through to collect the data, to analyze it, and come out with the results at the end.